The invitation had been sitting on Winona Falk's kitchen counter for 11 days, and every morning she told herself she wasn't going. Every morning she made coffee, looked at the heavy cream cardstock with its gold-embossed lettering, and thought about how the last time she'd seen Marcus. She stopped herself. Not Marcus. Not her problem anymore. She went anyway. The Hartwell Foundation's annual gala was held at the Drake Hotel in Chicago, and Winona had exactly one dress that worked for an event like this. She'd bought it 2 years ago before everything fell apart, from a boutique in Wicker Park run by a woman named Dottie, who had the good sense to say, "You look beautiful," and mean it. The dress was midnight blue, wrap style, with long sleeves and a neckline that dipped just enough to feel like a decision. She'd stood in front of her bathroom mirror for 20 minutes before leaving her apartment, tilting her head, trying to see herself the way Dottie had seen her. She couldn't quite get there, but she went anyway. Winona Falk was 31 years old. She was a structural engineer who had spent the last 4 years building bridges, actual bridges, the kind that crossed rivers and held up semi-trucks, for a mid-size firm in the South Loop. She had a master's degree from Northwestern, a reputation for solving load calculations that made senior engineers quietly hand her their problems, and a laugh that her best friend Celeste always said was the most honest thing about her. She was also, by every metric the world cared to measure, fat, not curvy, not full-figured, not any of the softening words people reached for when they were trying to be kind. Fat. She'd decided years ago to just use the word, because the dancing around it was exhausting, and she was tired of being exhausted by that particular thing. She was tired of a lot of things, actually. The Drake's Grand Ballroom was the kind of room that made you feel like you should be wearing better shoes. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, the low hum of a string quartet in the corner. The Hartwell Foundation raised money for infrastructure in underserved communities. It was technically her field, which was the reason the invitation had arrived in the first place. Her firm had partnered with the foundation on a project 2 years prior. The dinner was a formality. She could stay for an hour, show her face, leave. She was reaching for a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray when she heard his voice. Winona. Not a question. Not even a greeting, really. Just her name, said in that flat way that meant he was already cataloguing her, already running his assessment. She turned. Camden Price had not changed in 18 months. Same sharp jaw, same sandy hair that he kept just long enough to look careless. He was with 2 other men she didn't recognize, and they were all holding whiskey in thick-bottomed glasses, and he was looking at her with an expression she knew too well, the particular cocktail of pity and contempt that people wear when they see someone they've decided they've outgrown. They had dated for 2 years. She had believed for most of those 2 years that she was loved. Camden, she said. She kept her voice even. It wasn't hard. She'd had 18 months to practice. "You look." He paused. The pause was intentional. "You haven't changed." It was designed to land like an insult, and it did, but not in the way he'd intended. She had changed, enormously and privately, in ways that had nothing to do with her body, and everything to do with what she'd decided she was willing to accept. But she didn't say that. She just looked at him. "I heard you're still at Meridian," he said. "The bridge firm. I am good for you." He said it the way people'd say, "Bless your heart." He glanced at the men beside him, and one of them, younger, with the kind of practiced smirk that took years to calibrate, let his eyes drop to her waist and then back up, and the 2 of them shared something small and ugly between them. "We were just talking about the Hartwell project. I'm consulting for the board now. Congratulations," she said. Camden tilted his head, that gesture she used to find charming and now recognized as calculation. "Still wearing that color, I see. I always told you. Darker colors are more slimming. You might consider something more appropriate for this kind of event." The room didn't go quiet. Nobody stopped. The string quartet played on, and glasses clinked, and somewhere behind her a woman laughed at something her companion said. The world kept moving, indifferent and bright, but something in Winona's chest went very still. She had approximately 4 responses available to her. She knew this because she had, in the year and a half since Camden Price had told her, gently he'd said, "I'm telling you this gently," that he didn't think this was working, that he needed someone who fit his life better, that she should take better care of herself. She had mentally rehearsed every version of this encounter. She'd written the speech. She'd said it in the shower. She'd said it to Celeste, who had applauded. She had it ready. She opened her mouth. "Miss Falk." The voice came from somewhere to her left, and it was quiet, but it had the quality of something very heavy being set down on a marble floor. Not loud, just solid. She turned. The man standing 2 feet away was tall in the way that structural engineers notice, the kind of tall that suggested load-bearing capacity, that suggested whatever he stood on would hold. He had dark hair, a jaw that looked like it had been designed to be stubborn, and eyes that were a shade of grey that couldn't quite decide if they were blue. He was wearing a suit that had been made for him, not bought, and he was looking at Camden Price with an expression that was almost perfectly blank. Almost. "Miss Falk," he said again, and this time he looked at her and she felt the shift, from the cold of Camden's gaze to something entirely different. "I was hoping to speak with you about the Kemper Street overpass. I understand you managed the load analysis on the eastern span." She stared at him for 1 full second. The Kemper Street overpass was a real project. A project she had, in fact, managed. That was not a thing a person said randomly. "I did," she said carefully. "James Whitfield." He extended his hand. "I'm on the Hartwell board. I've been trying to get in front of you for 6 months. Your firm keeps telling me you're booked." She shook his hand. His grip was dry and unhurried. He wasn't performing the handshake, he was just doing it. "We are booked," she said. "I'm sorry, did we have a meeting scheduled tonight?" "We do now," he said it simply, without pretense. Then, as if Camden were a piece of furniture he'd just noticed, he turned and looked at him. "I don't think we've met." Camden straightened. He had the instincts of a man who understood hierarchy, and something in James Whitfield's bearing had activated them. "Camden Price. I'm a consultant for the board." "Right." James Whitfield didn't add anything to that. He just looked at Camden for a moment, and what passed between them wasn't a threat. It was something quieter than that, and somehow worse. Then he looked back at Winona. "Would you mind? There's a table near the back. I'd prefer somewhere quieter if you're open to it." She looked at Camden once more. He was doing the thing where he tried to look unbothered and wasn't quite managing it. "Of course," she said, and she followed James Whitfield across the ballroom. The table he'd mentioned was in an alcove off the main room, set slightly apart from the crowd, with a good sightline to the exits. She noticed that. Engineers noticed things like sightlines. He pulled out a chair and she sat, and he sat across from her without any of the performed ceremony that men sometimes used when they were making a point about being gentlemen. He just sat, like it was the next logical step. "You actually know about the Kemper Street project," she said. It came out more like a test than she intended. "I know about all of them." He picked up the small menu card and looked at it without reading it. "The Hartwell Foundation has been trying to hire your firm for 2 years. I've read every project you've been lead engineer on since 2022. That's either flattering or slightly alarming. Probably both," he said. "I apologize for the abrupt intervention back there. You looked like you were about to say something. I had a very good speech prepared." "I believe you." He set the menu down. "That man, Price, is he someone you wanted me to ignore?" It was a direct question. She appreciated direct questions. She'd spent enough of her life around people who talked in circles. "An ex," she said. "From a while ago." James Whitfield nodded once. Nothing about his expression shifted into pity or understanding or any of the standard emotional furniture people rolled out when you told them something personal. He just received the information and set it down somewhere. "Does he consult for the board?" Winona asked. "He submitted a proposal. We haven't hired him." A pause. "We won't be hiring him." She looked at him. He looked back at her. She couldn't tell if he was saying that for her benefit or as a statement of unrelated fact, and she found she didn't want to ask. A server appeared, and James ordered 2 glasses of something that turned out to be very good Burgundy, without asking her preference. But she noticed he'd glanced at the empty, sparkling water glass she'd carried over and made an inference. She didn't hate it. "The Kemper Street East span," he said, returning to it. "There was a problem with the pier foundation estimates in the original contractor report. You caught it." "It would have failed," she said. "Underload within 4 to 7 years. The soil composition wasn't." She stopped. "Sorry, I assume you're not here to talk about soil composition." "I actually am," he said. "That's the job." She looked at him again. He had a way of saying things without elaboration that made you listen harder, the way a quiet room made you hear more. "What job, exactly?" "The foundation is leading a public-private project. 3 pedestrian bridges across flood-prone areas in underserved neighborhoods on the south and west sides. No federal oversight, so no procurement delays, full engineering autonomy for the lead firm." He had a folder in his breast pocket, thin, folded once, and he produced it and slid it across the table. "I've been authorized to make a formal offer to Meridian. But the condition is that you're the lead on all 3 spans." Winona looked at the folder. Then she looked at him. "Why me specifically?" "Because the Kemper Street calculation saved a bridge that 3,000 people cross every day," he said. "I want someone who does the math right even when it's inconvenient." She opened the folder. The figures inside made her breath go shallow in the way it did when she looked at something both impressive and terrifying. "This is a significant budget," she said. "Yes, and a significant timeline, 30 months. "I know that's aggressive." "It's not aggressive," she said. "It's nearly impossible." "But not actually impossible." She looked up. He was watching her with an expression that had something in it she hadn't expected. Not challenge, exactly. More like confidence in someone else's ability, which was a thing she'd encountered rarely enough that she didn't always recognize it on first pass. "I'd need to review the soil surveys," she said, "and the flood modeling data, and I'd need to talk to my project director before committing to anything. Of course. And I'd need to understand the community consultation process. These are neighborhoods. People live there. The design should reflect that." Something shifted in his expression, very slightly, in a direction she couldn't immediately name. "Yes," he said. "That's exactly right." They talked for an hour. About load distribution and anchor points and community input and flood stage data from the last decade. She'd intended to stay for 1 hour total at this event, and somewhere in the middle of explaining why composite deck panels were preferable to precast concrete in flood-adjacent installations, she stopped noticing the time. At some point she reached for her wine and it was empty, and there was another glass there, and she didn't remember the server coming. When they finally paused, both of them simultaneously in the way that happened when 2 people had temporarily exhausted a subject they were both interested in, James Whitfield looked at her for a moment before he spoke. "Can I say something that isn't about bridges?" "You can try," she said. "That man earlier, Price. You don't have to. I want to. He wasn't apologetic about it. I was close enough to hear what he said to you about your dress. He said it plainly, without performing outrage or performing delicacy, just saying the words the way you'd state a measurement. He was wrong, and he knew it, and he said it in front of other people, because that's what a man does when he's trying to take up more space than he's earned." Winona was quiet for a moment. She'd had versions of this speech said to her before, well-meaning versions, Celeste's versions, the version her mother gave every Thanksgiving. They usually made her feel held up and sad at the same time, like she was a proof someone was trying to show her. This felt different. He wasn't consoling her. He was just telling her something he'd observed, the same way he'd told her about the pier foundation. Here is a fact. Here is its implication. Here is what follows. "I know he was wrong," she said finally. "I know you do." He picked up his wine glass and looked at it. "I just wanted to say it out loud, so it existed in the room." She looked at him for a long moment, at the exact set of his jaw, the careful neutral of his expression, The way he was doing the thing she'd noticed all evening, where he put things down and let them sit without needing her to respond to them. "How long have you been on the Hartwell board?" she asked. 4 years. "And how long have you been trying to get a meeting with Meridian?" "As I said, 2 years. But you've never come to this gala before." He looked at her. "What makes you say that?" "Because I've been to this gala twice," she said. "And I have a good memory for faces." A pause. Then something shifted in his expression, the near imperceptible version of a smile. "I don't usually attend events like this," he said. "It's not my preference, but you came tonight." "I came tonight." She considered that. She put it somewhere in her mind and looked at it from a few angles, the way she looked at a structural problem, checking for load and consequence. "I'll read the proposal over the weekend," she said, "and I'll set up a meeting with my project director next week. I'll send you the soil surveys tonight. It's 9:30. "The surveys have been sitting in a folder on my desktop for 8 months, he said. "I've been waiting to send them to the right person." She looked at him again. "Mr. Whitfield. James." The name sat differently than she expected. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly. All right, is this a real project? Or is this the part of the evening where I find out it was about something else entirely?" There was a silence that lasted exactly long enough to be real. "It is a real project," he said. "The bridges exist, the funding exists, the communities exist. They've been waiting 3 years for someone to build them." He set down his glass. "And if you choose not to take it, I will find another firm, and the bridges will still get built, and I will be disappointed but not surprised, because your schedule is genuinely unreasonable." He said it without rancor. "But I came tonight because I wanted to ask you directly, and I wanted to understand why someone with your ability has spent 4 years doing work that's a fraction of what she could be doing." Winona was quiet. "That's a very personal observation for a first meeting," she said. "Yes," he said, "it is." She thought about the 11 days the invitation had sat on her counter. She thought about the mirror and the dress and the 20 minutes she'd spent trying to see herself the way Dottie had seen her. She thought about Camden's voice, saying, "Darker colors are more slimming," and the way the man beside him had looked at her, and the way she'd opened her mouth to deliver a speech she'd written in the shower at 2 in the morning, 8 months after a relationship ended. She thought about the Kemper Street overpass and the 3,000 people who crossed it every day, not knowing. "Send me the soil surveys," she said. "Tonight." James Whitfield reached into his jacket and produced a business card, an actual card, heavy stock, just a name and 2 contact numbers, and set it on the table beside her wine glass. "My direct line," he said, "not the foundation office." She picked it up. She looked at it. She put it in the small beaded clutch she'd borrowed from Celeste, and had already been anxious about leaving somewhere. They stood at the same time, which was not planned, and for a moment they were both standing, and he was taller than she'd fully registered when they were sitting, and she was looking up at a slight angle. "Winona," he said, "not Miss Falk. Just her name, unhurried." "Yes." He was wrong about the dress too. He said it quietly, without looking away from her. "For the record." She didn't say anything for a moment. She could feel the slight warmth in her face, not embarrassment, something older and quieter than embarrassment. "Noted," she said. She walked back through the ballroom. She did not look for Camden. She was almost at the coat check when she heard it. Camden's voice, carrying from somewhere near the bar, and beside it a laugh she didn't recognize, and then her name, and then something she caught in fragments. Always had to be the smartest person in the room, and imagine trying to wear that too. She stopped walking. She turned around. Camden was standing with 3 people now, 2 men and a woman with the kind of blowout that required professional assistance, and he was mid-sentence, his posture loose with whiskey and the confidence that comes from having an audience. She had thought for a moment that she was going to say something, walk over, deliver the speech finally, let him see her face. But she looked at him, and she thought about what James Whitfield had said. Not the part about the dress, the other part. That's what a man does when he's trying to take up more space than he's earned. And she thought about what that meant, which was that his trying was a measure of his scarcity, not hers. She thought about 30 months and 3 bridges and 3,000 people who didn't know someone had once done the math right for them. She turned back around and went to get her coat. The email arrived at 10:47 p.m. The subject line read, Kemper, South and West Spans, Soil Survey Package. There were 4 attachments. The cover note said, Take your time. The survey dates back to 2019. The flood modeling update is the 3rd document. I've flagged the sections I had questions about, JW. She sat down at her kitchen table in her coat, the clutch still over her wrist, and opened the 3rd document. She had questions too. She stayed up until 2 a.m. reading, making notes in the margins of a printed copy, drawing small diagrams in the white space where the margins were wide enough. At some point, she made coffee. At some point, she turned on the lamp over the table because she hadn't noticed the overhead light going strange. The work was real. The problem was real. And the problem was interesting in the way that only real problems were. Not clean, not theoretical, the kind of interesting that required you to sit with uncertainty before the shape of a solution appeared. She wrote 3 questions she needed to ask him and saved them in a draft. She did not send them that night because it was 2 a.m., and she didn't know him well enough yet to send questions at 2 a.m. But she looked at her phone once, and then put it face down, and went back to the survey. The dress was still on. The heels were by the door where she'd stepped out of them without noticing. The business card was on the edge of the kitchen counter, beside the stack of project files and the coffee mug, and the plant she'd been forgetting to water. She reached over and stood the card up against the mug so she'd see it in the morning. Outside, Chicago was doing what Chicago did in November, cold and flat and indifferent to the people moving through it. Somewhere across the river, 3 bridges needed to be built, and people who had been waiting years for them were sleeping without knowing that tonight something had shifted, that someone had done the math, or was about to, and the answer was beginning to look like yes. Winona Falk picked up her pen and kept working. She had always been the kind of woman who got things done. She was just finally in a room where someone had noticed.